Want to make jewelry that looks like it's straight from a boutique store but without the price tag? This is the only technique you need to know. It's beginner friendly, incredibly fast, and creates super strong professional pieces. You can use it to make bracelets, necklaces, bag straps, or even dog collars. It's perfect for making gifts or even starting your own business. I'm going to cover absolutely everything you need to know, so let's begin. In terms of materials, you're going to need some tiger tail jewelry wire. It's what we're going to be stringing our beads onto, but it's essentially a whole series of very, very fine strands of stainless steel, all woven together and then coated with nylon on the outside to make it feel nice and soft. As you can see, it bends and flexes quite easily, giving your jewelry a nice soft drape when you wear it. But because it's got that stainless steel on the interior, it is extremely strong. It's also nice and firm so that when you come to threading on your beads, you don't need a needle or anything like that. They'll just slide straight on. These tiny little beads here are called crimps. We're going to be using these to secure the ends of our jewelry so that it's really strong and durable. We also have some crimp covers. These are going to help us to make our jewelry look really professional and cleanly finished so that it just looks really fantastic once you're done. So I have a hook clasp just here. The only thing that's important about the type of clasp that you use is that it has some form of loop to attach to. You can use any color material you like or any style of clasp. Just make sure that it has that loop. Additionally, I also recommend having a couple of 3mm beads in a color that matches your findings, or a nice crystal that matches your beads. Seeing as our wire is made with stainless steel, you're going to need some form of cutter. You could probably use a pair of old scissors if you want to, but over time they'll likely be blunted by the wire, so it's better to use a proper cutting tool like this one, which is made from stainless steel. The only other tool you're going to need are a pair of chain nose pliers like this one here. What is important is that they're completely flat on the inside. A lot of pliers have little ridges. They're not going to be useful for this particular type of jewelry making. It must be flat on the inside so that we can use this for squashing things. So the first thing you need to do is figure out exactly how much tiger tail wire you're going to need. You need to work out the size that you want your finished piece of jewelry to be, and then add about 30 centimeters or 12 inches on top of that. The wire itself is pretty inexpensive, so it's worth having too much wire because you can always cut off excess, rather than cutting yourself a piece that's a bit too short. I'm going to be making a 17-inch necklace, so I'll need 17 inches of wire plus another 12 on top of that, which gives me 29 inches, but I may as well just do 30 to be on the safe side. Once you've measured that length out, take your cutters and cut your wire. Now we're going to add the findings onto one side of our jewelry wire. First, we're going to pick up our crimp bead just here. As you can see, the wire is firm enough that you don't need to use a needle. The beads will just slide straight on. Don't let it go too far down the wire. Just a couple of inches is enough. Then we're going to take our 3mm bead just here and through one side of our clasp. Next, we're going to thread the end back down through that 3mm bead and through the crimp. Once you've got it through like this, slide the crimp and the 3mm bead up towards the clasp, but we want it to sit just short of locking it in place. We want to make sure our clasp is still free and able to move. So the reason we've used this 3mm bead just here is to keep these two wires really close together when they go through the crimp. Make sure you have a tiny bit of space between the 3mm bead and the crimp, and then using your pliers, come in and give it one press very firmly. As you do that, the crimp will be squished and become flat like this just here. This is going to be a really secure finish and is going to prevent your beads from falling off the wire. Now we're going to hide that little squashed crimp and make it look much neater by using this 3mm crimp cover just here. If we take a close-up look, you can see it's kind of a hollow horseshoe shape, a bit like a Pac-Man. So what we're going to do is place this little horseshoe around our crimp bead and close it over to turn it into a ball shape. That way, when it's finished, it'll just look like another 3mm bead. If you look closely, you can see I'm using a microfiber mat. That makes it really easy for me to stand this little crimp cover up so that I can drop my crimp inside of it. You can also hold the crimp in your hand if you don't have a mat. Just try and hold it so that the hole is facing upwards. Drop that crimp inside of the crimp cover, like so, and see how it fits quite nicely inside. All you need to do now is just use these pliers, give it a gentle squeeze to close the claws into each other. And if you look closely, you can see it's not quite closed properly. If you just keep squeezing it flat like this, it'll sort of buckle, which we don't want. So instead, what we're going to do is almost do it diagonally so that it is right on the lip of one side. Then do the opposite lip and give that a little squeeze. And just spend a bit of time squeezing the two until eventually you get this really neat, perfect little close like this here. So there you go. Now you can see it just looks like we have two 3mm beads on the end of our work here. Now you're ready to thread on beads in any way you like. Doesn't matter what size they are, doesn't matter what shape, and it doesn't matter what order. It's entirely up to you how you want to do it. I'm going to be making my necklace with a strand of gemstones. They generally come on strands that are 16 inches long, so I'm going to share a couple of tips with you for making your beads go a bit further so that from one single strand you could also make a matching bracelet and a pair of earrings as well. So obviously, first of all, the easiest way to make your beads go a bit further is instead of using a hook clasp like this one here, is to use a lobster clasp like this one with a 2-inch extension chain. If you've got 2 inches of chain, that's 2 inches worth of beads that you don't need for your bracelet or necklace. Next is to use some form of small spacer bead. Something like this with a little bit of crystal sparkle to it. By being really, really small, actually almost you don't see the beads. They just sort of space these crystals out in just a tiny way. But then while you're wearing your piece of jewelry and it moves, it catches the light and glints and sort of brings your piece of jewelry to life. Alternatively, what you can do is use some more of those 3mm round beads in the same color as your findings and use those as your spacings in between. Obviously, there's also other sizes that you can use, or if you wanted to, use some crystal rondelle spacers like these ones here that match the size of your bead just to add a bit of extra space in between. I'm going to show you how all three different options look on your jewelry wire. Here at the bottom you can see I've just got the plain beads on their own with no spaces in between. You can see each one of these has 5 beads on it, and just by the size of the spacer that you put in between varies how much further your beads will go. So for example, if you have a look at the difference between the one of just plain beads on its own and then using these tiny little crystals, already you can see that we're going to use 1 less bead for every group of 5, essentially making your beads go 25% further. Then using the even larger 3mm, you can see that makes it go even further still by another half bead probably or so. And then down here, where I've used these crystal rondelles, that just makes only a very small difference, because I think if you use too many of them, it's maybe a little overwhelming. But when used in moderation, it can actually look really, really fantastic. Of course, you can use whatever beads you like. You could also use seed beads in the gaps if you prefer, or combinations between the two. So for example, if you wanted to use this as like a small unit and then have crystals either side, you could do that. But it's entirely up to you how you will work out how you want your design to look. Personally, I'm a big fan of using the small crystals just to get that extra sparkle out of your jewelry. So I'm going to make it like this one here. It's time to start threading on my beads. Once you've added on the first few, we're going to slide them on down to the end of our wire. If you have a look, you can see we've got this tail piece still here. We don't want to cut this off too close to our crimp because that can make our bracelet or necklace a little bit weaker. So we're going to thread the beads over both wires for at least the first inch or two. If you just slowly take your time and feed them over the top, you can see that holds both wires together now. Now that I've done about an inch, I'm going to just bring in my cutters here and very, very carefully, nice and close to that last little bead, cut off the excess. Be really careful that you don't accidentally cut this wire off too. Now we're going to just keep threading on more beads. There we are, almost finished. Now all we need to do is add on the other side of our clasp. As you can see at this end here, we've got what looks like 2 silver beads, but one is with our crimp, and we ended with our crystal. So we want to make sure that the opposite side looks exactly the same. I've threaded on my last crystal. Grab out a crimp bead, thread it on, followed by one of our 3mm silver beads, and the other side of our clasp. Now, this is the most important part to make sure we've got a really clean finish. You want to make sure that there's absolutely no gaps where there's wire showing or where it's loose. We want to make sure that it's not so stiff that it loses that softness about it. So once you're happy with it, pull it tight like this here so that there's no gaps, but it's still loose enough. Then get your wire. Let's pass it back through at least the first few inches worth of beads. Don't worry about sliding them down. We'll fix up the tension right at the very, very end. Let's get it all nice and tight again by pulling on this thread just here and get it to where it's fairly close just here and we don't have too much of a gap. Now we can just pull this wire through here, and if we keep hold of where this little clasp section is, that'll stop the wire from bending too early and creating a kink. And at this point here, if you take your pliers just here, because they have a nice fine tip that definitely helps, you can hold nice and close to where your clasp is, and that's going to help prevent these beads from sliding in this direction and accidentally adding in any space between the wire. Now don't worry if there's a tiny bit of space just here, that's going to get used up because you can see we need a little bit more space for that 3mm bead when we've added in our cover. So let's just pull that down a little tighter, pinch it so it's nice and firm. And then again, make sure that this is loose enough that it can move freely. You don't want it to be too stiff or too loose, just trying to find like a nice balance. Now here we can see we've got a tiny bit of a gap, so just hold that clasp and give it a little tug until that gap just disappears and becomes a little bit smaller. This will be fine because that will be taken up by this little crimp cover. Now take these pliers and we're going to give that crimp a nice firm squeeze in position there. That locks it all in, and if you have a look, that tiny bit of space that we had now gives us that room to add in our final crimp cover into that gap. So now just grab your cutters and we're going to give this a little snip. Now be extra careful when you do this. You don't want to cut your main wire. You only want to cut off the tail. So try and bring that in very, very neatly, like so that you know that you're not going to get that other wire, and give it a snip. Now, take your crimp cover and pop it into the gap so that the crimp is now hidden inside. Take your pliers, and just like before, we're going to just spend a bit of time to close it over till it's in that perfectly round shape. There we go. Looks nice and neat. And, as you can see, still nice and malleable, and there's no gaps in our wire either. There's our necklace all finished. Just close that little clasp over, and there it is done. Plus, if you take a look, I've got all these beads left over. There's surely going to be enough here that I can make myself a nice matching little bracelet to go with, maybe even a pair of earrings. So I may as well make that up real quick now too. So there you go, I've got my necklace, and I've managed to make a matching bracelet. Plus, I also have 2 beads left over for making a pair of earrings, and all I had to do was add in a few extra crystals here and here to take up the space for those beads to make sure I had enough. Thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.